99% of deaths after 75 happen because of these 5 reasons. Avoid them. Have you ever wondered why some people reach their late 70s and 80s with strength, clarity, and a spark still burning in their eyes, while others, somewhere along the way, simply fade? Is it just luck or genetics? Or is there something more, something hidden, that determines whether we thrive or decline after 75? Here's what might shock you. Science, doctors, and countless studies agree. Nearly all deaths that happen past the age of 75 are not random. They're not just the result of old age. Instead, they are driven by a handful of predictable, silent forces. 5 patterns so common, yet so dangerously underestimated, that they account for over 99% of the deaths after 75. These are not rare diseases or freak accidents. They're everyday habits, subtle signals your body gives, or choices made without thinking. Small things that build up over decades until one day it's too late. What's even more frightening is that most people, good people, never see them coming. They wake up one morning with less strength, less memory, less purpose. The doctors call it natural decline. But the truth is, it's avoidable. Because behind this so-called decline are real causes, and once you see them, you can change your path. In this video, I'm going to reveal these hidden forces. I'll show you what most people miss until it's too late. Backed by real data, research, and patterns observed in thousands of people who made it past 75, and those who didn't. By the end, you won't just understand why so many people die prematurely after 75, you'll know exactly what to avoid, what habits to question, and what signs you should never ignore. And if you stay until the end, you might just walk away with something even more valuable: the tools to not only add years to your life, but life to your years. If you're ready for that, I want you to comment number 1 below. Because what you're about to learn might change the way you look at aging forever. One of the most dangerous forces working silently inside the aging body is inflammation. Not the kind you see when you cut your hand or twist your ankle, but the slow, invisible fire that burns deep within, damaging cells, tissues, and arteries year after year. Doctors call it chronic inflammation, and it's become known as the secret killer of the modern age. It doesn't cause pain, it doesn't scream for attention, but it is there, quietly sabotaging every system in the body. And by the time most people realize it, the damage is already done. For George Harris, this silent fire has been burning for years. He didn't see it coming. It started small: some extra weight around the belly, occasional heartburn, swollen joints he blamed on just getting old. But underneath, a more serious storm was brewing. Years of processed foods, sugary snacks, and microwave dinners loaded with preservatives pushed George's body into a constant state of alert. His immune system, designed to fight off infections, stayed switched on, fighting shadows that didn't exist. Over time, that chronic battle began to wear him down. His blood vessels stiffened. Plaque formed in his arteries, his heart, his brain, even his muscles, all quietly under attack. By the time George was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, his doctor tried to explain, "This isn't just bad luck or aging. This is inflammation, and it's been eating away at you for years." Frank Miller's story took a different path. He faced loss, too. Grief, loneliness, all the emotions that could have led him down the same road. But Frank, maybe by instinct or luck, made choices that kept that fire at bay. Every morning, he laced up his shoes and walked, rain or shine. He grew his own vegetables, filling his plate with greens, tomatoes, and blueberries. foods known to cool the body's inner fire. Frank didn't know the science. He just knew he felt better when he moved and ate real food. What he didn't see was how every step, every meal, was silently protecting his heart, his brain, his future. His blood pressure stayed low, his memory sharp. And while his hands ached with arthritis, his doctor told him his heart was strong, far stronger than most men his age. Studies now confirm what Frank's life proves. Chronic inflammation is the root of most deaths after 75. It fuels heart disease, Alzheimer's, cancer, and even depression. But it's not inevitable. It's not just age. It's the result of years of choices: what we eat, how we move, and how we handle stress. The good news? It can be reversed. Even after 70, the body responds. Real foods, daily movement, quality sleep. They don't just make you feel better. They put out the fire. They buy you time. Few things are as underestimated or as deadly as the slow, creeping weight of isolation. We think of heart disease, cancer, or diabetes as the great killers of old age. But the truth is, loneliness belongs on that list. Studies show that chronic social isolation increases the risk of early death by up to 50%. That's greater than the risk of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. For George Harris, isolation didn't come all at once. It happened slowly, in the spaces between major life events. First, it was retirement. The daily conversations, the meetings, the sense of being needed, all gone in a moment. At first, he enjoyed the silence, the long mornings, the quiet afternoons. But then, his wife got sick. And by the time she passed, George had already lost the habit of reaching out. His friends called, then they stopped. Neighbors waved, but George rarely left the house. His world shrank to the walls of his living room, the dull light of his television, and the repetitive comfort of his recliner. And with every passing year, his voice grew quieter, his mind slower, his body weaker. What George didn't know is that loneliness doesn't just feel bad. It physically breaks the body down. Isolation triggers stress hormones, weakens the immune system, and accelerates cognitive decline. The brain, deprived of connection and purpose, begins to shrink. And without anyone to notice the changes, George's descent went unchecked. Frank Miller faced the same threats. After losing his wife, the emptiness in his house was unbearable. But Frank knew, maybe from years of teaching, maybe from some instinct, that grief could be a trap. He forced himself out of the house. Friday nights at the diner with old friends became his ritual. Even when he didn't feel like it, Frank showed up. They talked politics, sports, their grandkids. They laughed, argued, remembered old times. And with every conversation, Frank was fighting a battle he didn't even see. The battle against isolation. Science now proves what Frank lived. Human connection isn't a luxury, it's survival. People over 75 who maintain strong social ties live longer, stay mentally sharper, and have lower rates of heart disease and depression. It's not the number of friends that matters. It's the quality of the connection. One good friend, one real conversation, can be the difference between decline and vitality. Frank still misses his wife. That never changed. But because he stayed connected, he stayed alive, not just in body, but in spirit. George, on the other hand, faded long before his time. There's a moment in aging no one talks about. The day you wake up and realize your body no longer belongs to you. Movements that once felt effortless now demand thought. A simple trip to the kitchen feels like a chore. That creeping weakness isn't just getting older, It's something far more dangerous: muscle loss, or what doctors call sarcopenia. By the time most people reach 75, they've lost up to 30% of their muscle mass. Not because they were sick or injured, but because they stopped using it. And when muscle fades, everything else follows. Balance weakens. Bones become brittle. Falls happen. Independence disappears. George Harris knows this story too well. In his younger days, George was strong, proud of his firm handshake and his steady legs. But after retirement, he stopped moving. A slow shift from walks around the block to sitting most of the day, from cooking meals to heating frozen dinners. Over time, his muscles atrophied, but no one noticed until it was too late. It started with small stumbles. George blamed the loose carpet, the new shoes. Then came the first fall, then another. Each one stole a little more of his confidence, a little more of his independence. He stopped driving, stopped going out. And like a cruel cycle, the less he moved, the weaker he became. Frank Miller took a different road. He understood, maybe not the science, but the instinct, that the body needs to be challenged. Every morning before breakfast, Frank walked 2 miles. Even on the days his knees ached or the sky threatened rain, he walked. He kept his hands busy, gardening, fixing things around the house, even chopping wood for his fireplace. These small acts, repeated daily, kept his muscles alive. And with that strength came something even more precious: confidence. Frank still drives, still climbs stairs without fear, still gets down on the floor to play with his grandkids. And more importantly, he can get back up. Science now confirms what both men prove: muscle is life. A study published in The Lancet showed that grip strength alone is one of the strongest predictors of mortality in older adults. Not blood pressure, not cholesterol, but the simple ability to hold on. Muscle mass protects against falls, supports the immune system, and keeps the metabolism alive. And the good news? It's never too late to rebuild. Resistance training, walking, even simple bodyweight exercises can slow, stop, and even reverse sarcopenia. Frank is living proof. George is the warning. Strength isn't about vanity, it's survival. It's the difference between needing help or living free. There's a slow, invisible shift that happens inside the body long before most people feel its effects. It begins with small choices: a cookie after dinner, a sugary drink at lunch, skipping meals, and relying on quick fixes. Over the years, these choices reshape the metabolism, leading the body down a dangerous spiral. By the time most people notice, the damage is done. What was once a finely tuned system designed to convert food into energy becomes sluggish, resistant, and toxic. Blood sugar spikes, insulin surges, fat clings to the belly, and with it comes a parade of diseases: diabetes, heart failure, strokes, and even dementia. For George Harris, the signs were there. He just didn't know how to read them. His doctor warned him about prediabetes years ago. Cut back on sugar, they said. But change felt hard. What harm could another bowl of ice cream really do? By the time George hit 75, his body was no longer responding to insulin. The sugar that once gave him energy now poisoned his blood. His muscles weakened, his vision blurred, and his memory began to fail. What George didn't know, what most people don't know, is that metabolic decline isn't just about sugar. It's about survival. Once the body's ability to process energy breaks down, every organ suffers. Frank Miller knew little about metabolism or insulin, But somewhere along the way, he learned to respect food. He ate 3 solid meals a day, mostly whole foods, vegetables, lean proteins, and healthy fats. He avoided skipping meals because he knew how his body felt when he did. Frank didn't fear sugar, but he understood it wasn't meant to be the foundation of his diet. And without knowing the science, Frank protected his metabolism. His blood sugar stayed steady, his energy consistent, and because his body could still process fuel, his mind stayed sharp. Science backs this up. Research from the National Institute on Aging shows that insulin resistance, the body's inability to manage sugar, is directly linked not just to diabetes, but to cognitive decline and Alzheimer's. They call it type 3 diabetes, the silent killer of the brain. The real tragedy is how preventable it is. Movement, real food, and regular eating patterns can keep the metabolism alive, even into the 80s and 90s. It's not about cutting out every indulgence. It's about building a system the body can rely on. Frank did that. George didn't. And today, Frank still walks to the market, cooks his meals, and remembers every detail of the stories he tells. George, meanwhile, sits in the haze of blood sugar crashes and forgotten words. Another victim of a broken system no one taught him to protect. If this hit you harder than you expected, comment number 5 below. Because the fight for life after 75 isn't just about avoiding disease. It's about protecting the engine that keeps you alive. There's a moment in aging few people ever see coming, when the mind begins to drift, not because of disease, but because there's simply nothing left to fight for. No challenge, no purpose, no reason to wake up and push against the world. And once the mind loses that anchor, the body soon follows. For George Harris, that moment came quietly. After retirement, after losing his wife, George found fewer reasons to get out of bed. The days blurred together. Morning television, frozen meals, the slow march of hours with nothing to mark their passing. His once sharp mind, so good with numbers, so quick with stories, now struggled to finish a crossword puzzle. Conversations became harder, memories slipped away, and eventually, George stopped trying. What no one told him is that the brain is like a muscle. It thrives on challenge, on novelty, on purpose. Without it, the brain shrinks, literally. Neurons die, connections fade, and the spark that once made a person who they are begins to dim. Frank Miller faced the same crossroads. He lost his wife. He retired. He could have sat down and waited for time to carry him away. But Frank knew, maybe from his years as a teacher, maybe from sheer stubbornness, that the mind needed something to fight for. So, he gave himself purpose. Frank took up gardening, learning the names of every plant, every seed. He read books on history, on philosophy, on medicine, and he kept teaching, not in classrooms, but to anyone who'd listen. His grandchildren, the neighbors, the young cashier at the market. Frank had stories to tell, lessons to share. And because he kept his mind working, his mind stayed sharp. He still forgot names sometimes, still misplaced his keys. But Frank remained present, engaged, alive. Science backs this up. A 2022 study published in the Journal of Gerontology found that seniors with a sense of purpose, a reason to wake up every morning, had a 30% lower risk of cognitive decline. Purpose doesn't have to be grand. It can be as simple as tending a garden, caring for a pet, or mentoring someone younger. But without it, the decline is inevitable. The brain starves for challenge. And soon, what begins as forgetfulness becomes full-blown dementia. George didn't know this. By the time he realized how far he'd drifted, the words wouldn't come. The memories were gone. And worse, the will to fight was gone too. Frank, meanwhile, keeps planning his garden for next spring, keeps reading, keeps asking questions. Because he knows, the moment you stop fighting for your mind, you start losing it. There's a quiet destroyer that slips into life as we age. One so common that most people dismiss it as just another part of getting older. But chronic sleep deprivation is not harmless. It is a slow, invisible poison drip that weakens the body, clouds the mind, and shortens life itself. For George Harris, sleep became the enemy in his late 70s. What started as restless nights, lying awake thinking of his wife, turned into full-blown insomnia. He blamed his age. The doctors gave him pills. But the truth was far more dangerous. George wasn't just tired. His body was breaking down from the inside out. Sleep is when the body repairs itself. It's when the brain clears out toxins, the heart gets a chance to rest, and cells rebuild what the day has broken. Without it, the body runs ragged. Blood pressure rises. Memory falters. The immune system weakens. And the risk of heart disease, stroke, and dementia skyrockets. For George, every lost hour of sleep fed the cycle of decline. He grew more anxious, more forgetful, more frail. Some nights, he slept just 3 or 4 hours, and even that came in fragments. And with each restless night, George aged faster. Frank Miller, on the other hand, respected sleep. Maybe it was his years of discipline as a teacher, or maybe it was just luck. But Frank built his life around a routine that honored his body's need for rest. He woke with the sun and went to bed soon after it set. No late-night television, no scrolling through a phone. Just a book, a cup of chamomile tea, and the quiet acceptance that sleep was not wasted time. It was survival. And because Frank slept, his body stayed stronger. His memory held. His heart beat steady. Frank didn't need sleeping pills. He needed rhythm. The natural rise and fall of the day guiding his body into rest. Science tells us now that poor sleep is one of the most overlooked predictors of early death. A 2021 study published in Nature Aging found that adults over 75 who sleep less than 5 hours a night face double the risk of dementia compared to those who sleep 7 to 8 hours. And it's not just the brain. Sleep deprivation is linked to heart failure, diabetes, and even cancer. But like so many things, sleep can be reclaimed. Routine, sunlight exposure during the day, winding down at night, these simple practices help the body remember how to rest. Frank did it without knowing the science. George, like so many, learned too late that sleep is not a luxury. It is the foundation of health. So here we are, standing at the end of 2 very different journeys. George Harris and Frank Miller. 2 men, born in the same country, raised in the same era, both facing the same losses and challenges that life eventually brings to us all. And yet, when the final chapters of their stories are written, their paths couldn't be more different. George, like so many, didn't see the danger until it was too late. The small, quiet forces that steal life after 75 didn't arrive all at once. They crept in slowly. A skipped meal here, a restless night there, a phone call not returned, a walk skipped, another night alone. And before he could feel it happening, the fire inside him dimmed. His body weakened. His mind lost its sharp edge. Not because he wasn't strong, but because he didn't know what he was fighting. Frank, on the other hand, made no heroic choices. There was no miracle drug, no special treatment. What Frank chose, And what kept him standing strong were simple, deliberate acts repeated every single day. He kept moving. He fed his body real food. He fought for sleep. He stayed connected to life and the people around him. And maybe most importantly, he gave himself a reason to keep waking up every morning. A garden to tend, a book to finish, a conversation still worth having. Science is clear. Death after 75 isn't random. It follows a pattern, and those who survive longest aren't always the ones with the best genes or the best doctors. They're the ones who understand that longevity is built on the smallest of choices. The ones who refuse to hand over their bodies, their minds, or their spirits without a fight. And the truth is, you get to choose which story becomes yours. Right now, in this moment, you have the power to change your path, to stop believing that decline is inevitable, to take back what time and life have tried to steal from you. You can fight the silent inflammation, reconnect with people who matter, rebuild the muscle you thought was lost, protect your mind with purpose, and give your body the rest it's been begging for. It's not too late. Whether you're 60, 70, 80, the story is still being written. What matters is what you do next. So, if this message reached you, if you felt even a flicker of recognition or the pull of possibility, then I want you to do something right now. Comment below, tell me you're ready. Ready to fight. Ready to change. Ready to choose the path that leads not just to more years, but to more life in every year you have left. And if you haven't yet, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. Because there is so much more I need to share with you. Tools, secrets, and stories that can change everything about how you age. The choice is yours. The time is now. And your story, it's far from over.